When Judge Marcus Pendleton raised his hand and struck White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt in front of a packed federal courtroom, he thought he could silence her, humiliate her, remind the world who held the gavel. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that, 4 minutes later, his carefully built empire of silence, bribes, and backdoor deals would begin to crumble. This wasn't just about a slap. It was about power, corruption, and a woman who refused to back down. You've got to stay till the end. Because what happened next in Washington, D.C. didn't just shake the courtroom. It tore open the veil on a system built on fear. And Karoline, she was just getting started. Outside, the marble columns of the D.C. federal courthouse gleamed under the morning sun, pristine and proud, as if untouched by scandal. But inside, beneath those solemn symbols of justice, something darker pulsed through the air. The kind of tension that doesn't hum, it vibrates. Cameras had already begun clicking, pens scribbling as reporters took their places in the gallery. Some were whispering theories, others texting editors. Everyone knew something was about to happen. No one knew what. Karoline Leavitt stepped through security with the precision of someone who'd been under pressure before. Live briefings, hostile media rooms, moments when one wrong word could become a headline. But today was different. She wasn't here to spin a message. She was here as a witness, and she knew this courtroom was already primed against her. She was just 28. The youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, a lightning rod in a city addicted to polarization. To half the country, she was a warrior, unapologetic, strategic, and articulate in her defense of a deeply divided administration. To the other half, she was a villain, too confident, too loyal, too effective. She didn't care. She had never been interested in being liked. But what she did care about deeply was truth. And right now, the scales of justice were tilting violently away from it. She passed through the towering oak doors of courtroom 5C and scanned the room. The judge hadn't taken the bench yet. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder in the back rows, their eyes flicking between their notebooks and the security cameras mounted discreetly in the corners. Legal aides rustled papers at the counsel tables, the low murmur of hushed conversation floating under the fluorescent lights. Karoline took her seat quietly near the witness box, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Then the doors at the side of the courtroom swung open. Judge Marcus Pendleton entered like a man who believed he still ruled the world. At 64, he carried the kind of judicial gravitas that commands deference, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, tailored black robes sweeping behind him, icy blue eyes sharp as scalpels. For over 30 years, Pendleton had sat on the bench like a monarch presiding over a fracturing empire. His rulings had shaped elections, buried lawsuits, and silenced critics. Whispers swirled around him like D.C. fog, accusations of favoritism, suspicious dismissals, strategic recusal delays. But none of it ever stuck. To most, Pendleton was untouchable, and he believed it. His eyes scanned the room as he ascended the bench until they landed on her. Karoline Leavitt. Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply adjusted the cuffs of her blazer and sat straighter. The court clerk called the session to order, and proceedings began with dull legal preliminaries. But the room's real focus wasn't on opening arguments or procedural motions. It was on the silent battle already underway. Every glance, every breath between Karoline and the bench was heavy with history and implication. Then, a defense attorney mentioned political bias in the media. Karoline tilted her head slightly. Not a word, just a tilt. A spark in a room full of gasoline. Pendleton's gavel came down fast and sharp. Order. This court won't tolerate political theater. Karoline stood slowly from her seat. With all due respect, Your Honor, she said, her voice cool and measured. Can this court ensure fairness in a case that has clear political dimensions? Or should the public assume the outcome was predetermined before the opening statement? Judge Pendleton leaned forward, his knuckles whitening around the edge of the bench. "Are you questioning this court's integrity, Miss Leavitt?" "I'm asking a question," she replied. "One that millions of Americans are already asking at home." Silence thundered louder than any outburst. The moment had arrived. The gavel, the power, the pride. And in 4 minutes, his empire would begin to fall. The courtroom hadn't breathed since she spoke. Karoline's words still hung in the air like smoke after a shot fired. Judge Pendleton sat frozen behind the bench, his posture stiff, his fingers still clutching the gavel. The question she posed, calm, surgical, impossible to dismiss, landed like a strike to the center of the old man's pride. In Washington, D.C., pride was currency. And Pendleton had spent decades building his fortune. Now, in one calculated moment, Karoline had devalued it. The silence broke not with words but with movement. The judge pushed back his chair with a sharp scrape. He stood, slowly, deliberately, as if each step down from the bench were part of a performance only he understood. He descended the dais with eyes locked on Karoline. Not the way a judge should look at a witness, but the way a threatened king stares down a defiant challenger. The bailiffs didn't move. The attorneys watched with bated breath. The press, every camera, every microphone, captured every frame. Pendleton's black robe swayed as he advanced across the floor, and Karoline didn't rise, didn't step back. She turned toward him, steady, unreadable, refusing to flinch. "You think you're clever," he said, voice low but cracking. "You think your little media tricks work in my courtroom?" She looked him in the eye, not defiant, just unafraid. "I think Americans deserve justice that isn't filtered through bias and personal ego." The words hit him harder than any fist. He stopped just inches away. And then it happened. A sound like a gunshot in the stillness. The slap rang out, cruel and undeniable. Her head turned slightly from the force, hair shifting, a faint red mark already rising on her cheek. The room gasped in collective disbelief, journalists dropping pens, attorneys jolting upright, the echo of impact reverberating off marble and wood. And Karoline? She didn't move. She touched her cheek with 2 fingers, calmly, slowly. Then she turned her gaze back to Pendleton, eyes narrowed not in pain but in focus. Her voice, when it came, was cold as ice. "You just made a mistake you'll never recover from." It was quiet, but not soft. The kind of statement that doesn't end. Pendleton blinked, as if the gravity of what he'd done was only now sinking in. His breathing grew heavy. Reporters were already reaching for their phones, texts and tweets firing into cyberspace. Security cameras in the courtroom blinked red, recording, watching, saving. Karoline stepped back, not in fear, but in purpose. She turned to the stunned bailiffs. "I'd like to request immediate legal counsel, and I'd also like to ensure that video footage is preserved." The cameras clicked in a frenzy. Hashtags were already forming. Judge strikes, press sec. Pendleton assault. Karoline stands tall. The judge turned on his heel, storming back to the bench. "This court is in recess," he bellowed, voice ragged with desperation. He slammed the gavel so hard it cracked against the wood. Then he disappeared behind the heavy courtroom doors, the sound of them slamming echoing like a verdict. Karoline stood in the eye of the storm, alone but unmoved. She didn't need to raise her voice. The whole country was already listening. "Where's the laptop?" she asked, sliding into her SUV's back seat for the recess. Sarah passed it to her instantly. On screen were a dozen news feeds, social media dashboards, and trending tags. Every headline screamed the same story. "Federal judge strikes White House official. Press secretary slapped in court. Shock in Washington. But Karoline wasn't watching the headlines. She was studying the reactions. Pendleton's defenders were already trying to spin it. Claims of provocation. Murmurs that she was grandstanding for the cameras. But Karoline had spent years reading the wind. She knew when a tide had turned, and this time the current wasn't on Pendleton's side. "He lost control," she said, staring at the footage in slow motion. "And now we make sure he loses everything." Sarah looked over, cautious. "You think there's more than just the slap?" Karoline didn't even blink. "I know there is." She picked up her phone and dialed. The number rang twice before it connected. "Noah Blake?" she said. "This is Karoline Leavitt. I have a lead, and you're the only reporter I trust to follow it all the way down." On the other end, silence. Then, "Tell me everything." And just like that, the war began. The SUV pulled away from the courthouse, tires whispering across the pavement as Karoline sat in the back seat with her phone pressed to her ear. On the other end, Noah Blake's voice was calm, clipped, his tone sharpened by years of exposing DC's quiet rot. She gave him a quick summary: the courtroom, the judge, the slap. And as she spoke, she could almost hear him leaning forward, already connecting dots in that cluttered office of his. "This wasn't an outburst," she said. "This was a man who thought he was untouchable, who thought no one would ever hold him accountable." "He hit a federal witness on camera," Noah said. "That's not just political, it's criminal. And if he's that brazen in public, God knows what he's done in private." "I need your help," she said. "Not to cover for me, not to play politics. I need you to help me dig." There was a pause, long enough to make her heart beat harder. "All right," Noah finally said. "But I don't chase ghosts. I need something real to start with. You'll have it in 24 hours. She hung up and glanced at Sarah, who was furiously typing on her laptop beside her. The glow of the screen illuminated the storm on her face. News alerts, pundit reactions, statements from legal experts. The White House had already issued a bland one-liner: "We are aware of the incident and reviewing it internally." Translation? Sarah muttered without looking up. "They're waiting to see if this explodes or fizzles." "It's going to explode," Karoline replied. Sarah looked at her. "Then we set the fuse." Back at the White House, security let them in without a word. The place was buzzing, but in the tight-lipped, nervous kind of way DC institutions buzz when something big has happened but no one's sure where to look. Inside her office, the TV was already on. CNN was replaying the slap on a loop. The footage had been slowed, analyzed, framed, reframed. One anchor compared it to the Anita Hill hearings. Another called it an unprecedented judicial outburst in modern American history. The ticker below read, "Breaking: DOJ to review courtroom incident involving Judge Marcus Pendleton." Karoline sat at her desk and opened the envelope she'd requested from legal staff earlier that week, sealed records from a civil case Pendleton had presided over in 2019. A whistleblower had alleged misconduct in a federal grant allocation process. The case was dismissed in 2 hearings. No explanation, no follow-up. But Karoline remembered the woman, Dana Ruiz, former government analyst, quiet, brilliant, and terrified. She flipped through the records, redacted memos, motions, emails between agencies. And then she found it, a line buried in a footnote. Initial complaint tied to federal contractor Ryloth Corp. Dismissed on lack of material evidence, Ryloth. She turned to Sarah. "Find out everything you can about Ryloth Corp. Contracts, leadership, donor records. If they're tied to Pendleton in any way, we need to expose it." Sarah didn't ask why. She just nodded and started typing. That was the thing about Sarah. She didn't need every detail to trust Karoline's instincts. She'd seen them play out too many times. Karoline leaned back in her chair, letting the red mark on her cheek throb against the cool leather. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Short, cruel. "You think you're a hero. You're not. Stop now before someone else gets hurt." She stared at it for a long time, then forwarded it to Sarah without a word. Sarah read it, her fingers tightening over the keyboard. "This isn't just backlash," she said. "They're scared." "Good," Karoline replied. "Let them be." Across town, Judge Marcus Pendleton sat in his private chambers with a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed red. He'd spent the last hour watching the footage on a loop, trying to convince himself it looked like a misunderstanding. But it didn't. It looked exactly like what it was. A man with too much power losing control. A knock at his door broke the silence. His clerk entered, hesitantly. "There's a call for you, sir, from the Office of Judicial Oversight." Pendleton didn't respond at first. Then, after a beat, he downed the rest of the scotch, placed the glass on his desk, and stood. "Tell them I'll call back," he said, voice shaking with barely buried rage. "And tell them not to believe everything they see on Twitter." But even he knew. Karoline didn't sleep that night. She tried. God knows she tried. Closed her eyes, buried her face in the pillow, even turned on the white noise machine her husband insisted helped them both unwind from the chaos. But her mind refused to obey. At 3:17 a.m., Karoline sat upright in bed, opened her laptop, and began writing. Not a press release, not a statement. A list. Every questionable case Pendleton had overseen in the last 10 years. Names, dates, keywords, contracts. She built it like a wall, brick by brick, each entry a crack in the foundation. By sunrise, the list was 3 pages long. Sarah arrived at the West Wing just after 6, coffee in one hand, her phone already buzzing in the other. Her eyes widened when she walked into Karoline's office and saw her boss wide awake, eyes burning, still in yesterday's clothes. "You haven't slept." Karoline didn't even look up. "Neither has Pendleton, I promise you that." She slid the printed list across the desk. Sarah took it, scanning quickly. "Half of these were supposed to be sealed," she muttered. "How the hell did you?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is that this," Karoline said, tapping the paper, "isn't just about bias. It's about a network." Sarah lowered the sheet. "You think Pendleton's a front? I think he's a weapon, and someone's been aiming him for years." Just then, her phone buzzed. It was Noah. Karoline put him on speaker. "I've been going through Pendleton's financial disclosures," he said without preamble. "Standard stuff at first, investments, retirement, nothing flashy. But then there's this PAC, the Constitutional Majority Fund, supposedly nonpartisan, but it's got ties to Ryloth." Sarah sat up straighter. Karoline leaned in. "Define ties." Noah continued, his voice rising with every sentence. "Board member overlap. Financial transfers. And get this, one of the board members of Ryloth, a guy named Brennan Cord, was Pendleton's law clerk back in the 90s. They go way back." Karoline's lips tightened. "Cord's name is on 2 of the cases Pendleton dismissed in less than 72 hours. Both had potential whistleblower implications. Both vanished." "Yeah," Noah said. "I noticed that too." Sarah was already typing, cross-referencing donor lists. Brennan Cord donated over $200,000 to that PAC last cycle. It's not just corporate money, it's targeted. I want a full report on Cord. Business ties, property records, Personal contacts. If he's the link, we need to know what else he's connected to, Karoline said. Sarah nodded. And Noah? Karoline added. If you go public, they'll come for you too. There was a pause. They already have, he said. Last night, someone tried to access my cloud archives. Failed attempt, but it means they're watching. Karoline clenched her jaw. Good. Let them watch. Just make sure we move faster than they do. She ended the call and turned to Sarah. We go to the DOJ today. Official complaint. Not just about the slap, about the network. Sarah hesitated. We'll need airtight evidence. Karoline gestured to the list. Then let's seal the cracks. Call Dana Ruiz. She tried to expose this 4 years ago. Maybe she still wants to be heard. Across the city, in a high-rise suite overlooking the Potomac, Judge Marcus Pendleton sat with a towel pressed to his forehead, watching the news play out in flickering high definition. A panel of talking heads debated whether his actions were grounds for immediate removal. One network had dug up an old clip of him berating a defense attorney, calling it part of a pattern. Pendleton wasn't worried about that. He could weather that storm. What made his fingers tremble wasn't the slap or the footage. It was her, Karoline. The way she didn't flinch. The way she stared at him like she'd already seen through him. He reached for his phone and dialed a number only 3 people in Washington knew. It rang once, then connected. We have a problem, he said quietly. On the other end, a cold voice answered. You're not the only one. She's getting too close. If she finds the Atlanta connection, we're all exposed. Pendleton's throat tightened. So what do we do? A pause. Then the voice came back, smooth and merciless. We do what we always do, Marcus. We control the narrative. And if we can't control her, the silence finished the sentence. The next morning, the White House felt quieter than usual, like a city holding its breath before a verdict, or the hush before a storm rips through the streets. Karoline felt it the second she stepped out of the West Wing elevator. Staffers glanced her way, unsure whether to nod, salute, or avoid eye contact altogether. They'd all seen the video by now. They'd all heard the slap. But it wasn't the sound that shook them. It was what came after. Karoline Leavitt had become something else overnight. No longer just the youngest press secretary in history. She had become something Washington feared more than chaos. A woman with nothing to lose and everything to reveal. She entered the communications room flanked by Sarah, who had 3 phones buzzing in her hands and a coffee she hadn't touched in the other. Sarah tossed her phone onto the table. Ryloth Corp's board is going full radio silence. No press contacts, no social updates, no official statement. Karoline narrowed her eyes. They're hiding behind their money. They're hiding because they know we found a leak. That leak came in at 4:52 a.m. An encrypted message sent to Sarah's secure inbox. No name, no sender. Just an attachment. An audio recording, and a single line typed beneath it. This is what Cord said behind closed doors. Karoline had listened to it 5 times before dawn. Brennan Cord, unmistakable voice, crisp and arrogant, speaking during a private donor strategy meeting just 2 months before the slap. Pendleton has handled everything we've given him. If Leavitt keeps digging, we bury her in headlines, investigations, lawsuits, whatever it takes. She's not our problem. She's an obstacle, and obstacles get removed. Now Karoline played it again, this time for a room full of aides, legal advisors, and one very pale White House counsel. The room went dead quiet. That's enough, the counsel said finally, his voice thin. If that recording is real, this isn't just a judicial scandal, it's criminal conspiracy. It is real, Karoline answered without blinking. And it's just the beginning. Across the river, in a sleek private law office lined with abstract paintings and untouchable wealth, Brennan Cord stared at the same recording, his face unreadable. One of his advisors, red-eyed and sweating, paced the carpet. "We don't know how they got it, but it's already being dissected by legal analysts. DOJ is likely going to subpoena." "They won't," Cord interrupted. His voice was cool, almost bored. "They won't move without more, and we've buried worse." But Leavitt's pressing forward. "That slap, she's using it as a wedge to expose everything." Cord turned toward the window, watching the traffic snake through DC streets, like veins pumping blood through a corrupted body. "Then we take the air out of her lungs," he said. "We hit her where she breathes." Back at the White House, Sarah's laptop dinged with a new alert. She opened it, froze, then turned the screen toward Karoline. There it was, a front-page article on a far-right media outlet headlined, "Karoline Leavitt, the real extremist in the White House?" The subheading was worse. "Secret college recordings, militant ties, and the dark ambition of a woman too young and too dangerous to trust." Karoline didn't even blink. "That's from the Cord machine." She reached for her phone and dialed Noah. "We need to go public," she said. "Now. Play the recording. Mention Ryloth, Brennan Cord, Pendleton. Don't editorialize, just give people the facts and let them burn." Noah didn't ask if she was sure. He just said, "Give me an hour." As she hung up, Sarah rubbed her temples. "If they're smearing you, they might go further. What about your husband? Your son?" Karoline's jaw clenched. She walked to the office window, looking out over the south lawn. Her reflection stared back in the glass. "They already sent a threat last night," she said. "Didn't even hide the intent." Sarah's voice cracked. "You didn't tell me that." "I'm telling you now," she said, turning back. "Have Secret Service check the security system at home. Add surveillance at my son's daycare. But don't tell my husband yet. He worries first, asks questions later." Across the city, in a windowless room 3 floors beneath a federal agency whose name wasn't listed in any public directory, a man in a gray suit listened to the Cord recording through noise-canceling headphones. He took them off slowly, turned to the agent beside him and said quietly, "She just ripped the lid off something big." The agent nodded. "You think she knows what's coming?" The man's eyes narrowed. "She knows." The news broke faster than even Karoline expected. By mid-afternoon, Noah Blake's exposé was live on the Sentinel's front page, under a headline that could not be ignored. Judge Pendleton's secret network, leaked audio reveals shadow ties to political PACs, corporate power. The article was clean, surgical. No fluff, no grandstanding, just the facts, laid out in paragraphs sharp enough to draw blood. It quoted the audio word for word, named Brennan Cord, and mapped out the tangled web between Ryloth Corp., the Constitutional Majority Fund, and the cases Judge Pendleton had dismissed in near-record time. Karoline read it once, then again, and a third time in silence. She didn't smile. She didn't exhale. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a warning shot, and one that had been fired directly into the heart of DC's most well-armored secrets. By 3:00 p.m., #Pendleton Network and #Cord leaks had overtaken social media. Cable news anchors were trying to explain 10-year-old rulings in 20-second soundbites. Talk radio exploded with speculation. But Karoline wasn't watching any of it. She was preparing for war. Her office had become a command center, whiteboards lining the walls, timelines taped across cabinets, names and connections drawn in black marker like battle plans. Sarah paced behind her, taking calls, swiping through encrypted texts, running interference with reporters who now wanted more access than they'd ever granted her before. A knock at the door pulled them both from their focus. It was Agent Wexler, Secret Service. Mid-40s, stern. The kind of man who carried silence like a sidearm. "We've enhanced security at your residence," he said quietly. "Your husband and child are safe. We've also intercepted a second message this morning." He handed her a folded printout. She opened it. The words were typed, not handwritten. No signature. No threat too specific to track. "You're playing with fire. One more step, and it's your family that burns." She folded the note and handed it back. "Trace the origin, IP, device, any server it passed through. I want to know who typed that and where they were standing when they hit send." Wexler nodded. "Already on it." As he left, Sarah turned to her, voice lower now. "They're desperate, Karoline. That means they're close to making a mistake." "No," she replied. "They already did. The slap was the mistake. Everything after this, that's damage control, and they're bad at it." Sarah hesitated. "You know this isn't going to end with one judge, right?" Karoline nodded. "I know." She thought back to Dana Ruiz, the analyst who'd first tried to speak up years ago, only to be buried by court orders and silence. They had reached out to her again this morning. No answer yet. But Karoline knew the pressure was mounting. And if Dana talked, if she went public, it would be the match thrown into dry brush. By 4:00 p.m., Brennan Cord responded publicly. A carefully crafted statement from Ryloth's official channels. "The claims being circulated are politically motivated, based on unverified and selectively edited material. Mr. Cord has always acted with integrity and in full compliance with federal law." Karoline read the statement twice and said nothing. Noah texted her 10 minutes later. He blinked. "I've got 2 more sources. One's a former DOJ analyst. Other worked inside Cord's pack." She texted back. "Tell them off-record ends soon. They're part of something historic now." As dusk settled over D.C., the lights in Karoline's office burned on. She stared at the whiteboard, her finger tracing the red lines connecting Pendleton, Cord, and a new name that had just surfaced in a buried financial report. Senator Randall Dorn, longtime critic of the current administration, always on the Sunday shows, always defending judicial independence when Pendleton's rulings came under fire, always just a little too quick to defend the indefensible. Sarah read over her shoulder. "You think Dorn's in it?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "I think he funded part of it, or he's the one who brokered the connection between Cord and Pendleton. Either way, he's too close to this not to know." Sarah exhaled. "We're going after a sitting U.S. senator now?" Karoline turned. "We're going after anyone who sold the law to the highest bidder. I don't care what title they wear." Outside, the lights on the Capitol dome blinked in the distance, calm, serene, deceiving. But inside, power was unraveling. Carefully spun lies were starting to tangle. And the woman at the center of it all? She wasn't backing down. The next morning broke without sunlight. Gray clouds choked the sky over Washington, as if even the heavens were unsure whether to mourn or prepare. The city felt different, as though somewhere in its grid of monuments and secrets, a tide had shifted, and everyone who mattered could feel it. Karoline stood at her office window, coffee untouched, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out across the south lawn. Her reflection was calm, still, but underneath, the engine of war was humming. Senator Randall Dorn. The name circled her mind like a hawk. His official schedule had already been cleared. His office hadn't returned press calls. And the political morning shows that once gleefully hosted him were suddenly rescheduling. He knew the walls were closing in. Sarah entered without knocking, tablet in hand. "We just got the campaign finance records." Dorn's office routed money through a PAC called Citizens for Federal Integrity. Karoline turned. That's the one that funded Cord's defense group last year. And Ryloth's DC consulting wing before that, Sarah added. It's all connected. Pendleton was just the pawn. Cord was the handler. But Dorn? He's the buyer, Karoline said, finishing the sentence like a blade drawn from a sheath. Sarah's voice dropped. This is big. We're not just talking about judicial corruption. This is election interference, bribery, federal fraud. If we go public with this now— We don't, Karoline cut in. Not yet. Sarah blinked. We have everything we need. Karoline shook her head, stepping away from the window. We have a fire, but if we move too fast, they'll smother it. We need something that can't be spun, something they can't call partisan or emotional. We need testimony. She walked to the desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the last known address of Dana Ruiz, the whistleblower from the 2019 grant case. We get her, she said, and we light the fuse. It took 6 hours to track her down. Dana hadn't answered emails. She'd changed jobs twice, moved states, but she hadn't vanished. And when Noah Blake called her using a burner line and mentioned Karoline's name, there was a pause, then a single word: meet. They chose a quiet coffee shop in Alexandria. Rain had started to fall by the time Karoline arrived, pulling the hood of her coat over her hair and slipping inside unnoticed. Dana was already there, mid-30s, short curls pulled into a knot, a posture that screamed caution. Karoline sat across from her. No introductions, no pleasantries. You were right, Karoline said. In 2019 and 2020, every red flag you raised was real. Pendleton buried your case. Cord funded the operation. Senator Dorn cleared the way. Dana didn't blink. Her voice came out low and tired. And now I talk. And what happens? They smear me again? I lose my job? My clearance? My name? Karoline leaned forward. I can't promise they won't try, but I can promise you won't be alone this time. And I can guarantee the Justice Department will hear you, because they're already listening. Dana looked away. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. I still have copies of the original files, emails, directives, even the memo where Pendleton orders the redaction of evidence in the Ryloth audit. Karoline's pulse surged. Can you testify? Dana met her eyes, and for the first time the hesitation cracked. I will, but I want witness protection, full immunity, and I want it in writing before I say a single word to a federal agent. Karoline nodded. You'll have it. She left the shop before Dana did, sliding back into the SUV with rain streaking down the windows. Sarah was waiting in the back seat, watching the live feeds scroll across her tablet. Media's still circling. Dorn hasn't issued a denial yet. Some outlets are speculating a resignation. Karoline shook her head. He's not the kind that walks away. He's the kind that buries the evidence and rewrites the story. Sarah leaned in. So what's our next move? Karoline opened her phone, drafted a text, and sent it directly to the Deputy Attorney General. We have a cooperating witness. Dana Ruiz. She's ready to talk. Prepare for federal testimony. We'll be bringing her in under protection. Then she sent one more message to Noah. Tell your sources to be ready. Once Ruiz speaks, this goes public. And when it does, we name them all. Back in the Capitol, Senator Dorn stood at his office window, watching the rain wash over the marble like judgment. His chief of staff hovered nearby. Should we prep a press statement? Dorn's jaw tightened. No, not yet. But the Ruiz story, if it breaks, he turned sharply. Then we do what they never expect. We go after her first. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in 5 years. "We have a leak," he said, "and this one's about to become a flood." On the other end, a voice answered, "Then it's time we drown them." Karoline didn't know it yet, but the story was no longer hers alone. The slap had cracked the surface. The investigation had pierced the armor. But now, she was stepping into something deeper. A conspiracy that didn't just span judges and PACs. It touched the very core of the American machine. And they were coming. Rain slicked the streets of Washington as Karoline's SUV pulled up to the Justice Department. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and ominous, like the opening note of a war song. She stepped out without an umbrella, water streaking her coat, hair pinned back with military precision. Inside, federal agents waited to escort Dana Ruiz to a secured interview room. Sarah trailed behind her, eyes scanning every hallway, every face. The building hummed with tension, agents, clerks, attorneys moving just a little faster than usual, voices pitched slightly lower. Word had spread. The Ruiz testimony was happening. Inside the interview room, Dana sat at the far end of a long metal table, 2 federal agents beside her, a DOJ recorder running. She looked calm, but Karoline could see it, the slight tremble in her fingers, the way her eyes flicked to the corners of the room like she was still expecting someone to pull the plug. But no one did. Karoline took a seat just behind the glass in the adjacent observation chamber and folded her arms as Dana began to speak. "I was part of the auditing team for Ryloth Corp in 2019, Dana said. "My job was to verify allocation of federal grant funds for cybersecurity infrastructure. What I found were multiple discrepancies, ghost contracts, inflated invoices, service reports that didn't match any real work." She paused, glancing toward the agents. They nodded for her to continue. "I compiled everything in a report. I sent it to the Office of Inspector General, and within 48 hours, I was pulled off the project and reassigned. No explanation." The agent on the left leaned forward. "What happened to your report?" Dana's voice was steady now, anger giving it momentum. "Judge Pendleton issued a judicial hold on any action tied to the case. He called the complaint politically volatile and said it could disrupt national operations. Then the case disappeared from the OIG's docket. 2 weeks later, Ryloth received another $40 million. Karoline watched the agents exchange glances. They hadn't expected it to be this clear. Dana reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, pushing it across the table. "These are the emails between Pendleton's clerk and Ryloth's in-house counsel. They coordinated the delay in legal filings. You'll also find a scan of the memo Pendleton wrote, ordering redactions and advising federal prosecutors to stand down due to political risk." One of the agents opened the folder, flipping through the first few pages. His face hardened. "This is enough to trigger a full inquiry," he muttered. Dana wasn't done. "I also have documentation that Brennan Cord funneled money through a shell pack to finance Pendleton's legal seminars and speaking engagements. It wasn't payment for influence." She paused, then corrected herself. "No, actually, it was exactly that." Karoline stood slowly, her arms unfolding, her mind racing. The fuse was burning fast now. After the interview, as agents secured the evidence and DOJ legal teams began filing internal memos, Sarah met her in the hallway. "Holy hell," she whispered. "That was enough to bury them." Karoline nodded, but her eyes weren't celebratory. "They won't let this go quietly." Sarah checked her phone. "They already aren't. Dorn just filed a motion in federal court. Claims the Ruiz testimony was procured under political duress. He's calling it a press-coordinated ambush." Karoline smirked. "Desperate men talk loudest when the noose gets close." Back in her office, she turned on the news. Every channel had the same footage now. Dana Ruiz walking out of the Justice Department, flanked by 2 agents, Reporters shouting, flashes firing. Her name trended instantly. Karoline sat down, her hands on the edge of her desk. She knew what came next. The noise, the spin, the legal gymnastics. But none of it mattered anymore. They had documentation. They had the witness. And soon, they'd have indictments. At that same hour, in a private D.C. club shielded from public view, Senator Dorn poured a glass of scotch and handed a sealed envelope to a man in a gray suit. The man didn't sit. "They're moving fast," Dorn said, voice low, bitter. "The DOJ's already drafting subpoenas. If they link the offshore accounts to the campaign funds—" "They won't," the man said calmly. "Not if we burn the trail first." Dorn swallowed the scotch in one breath. "And Leavitt?" The man tucked the envelope into his coat. "She's the face now, but faces are easy to fracture." Karoline, meanwhile, walked out of the White House and into the rainy dusk. She didn't bring a coat. She didn't flinch from the cold. Somewhere behind her, the country was waking up to a truth it had never wanted to see. And somewhere ahead, the storm she had started was about to break wide open. The rain didn't stop. By the time Karoline stepped back inside the West Wing, her clothes were damp at the cuffs, and her heels left sharp clicks down the marble corridor. The hallway was quieter than usual. Staffers ducked into side rooms or turned quickly away from eye contact, not out of rudeness, but reverence. They'd seen the news. They'd watched the Ruiz footage. They were watching something larger take shape, and they all knew it centered on her. Inside her office, Sarah was waiting, coffee in one hand, a fresh folder in the other. The kind of folder that came sealed with initials instead of stamps. "DOJ just confirmed they've opened a joint investigation," Sarah said, voice barely above a whisper. "Pendleton, Cord, Dorn, they've greenlit subpoenas." Karoline took the folder and opened it. Inside were transcripts from Dana Ruiz's testimony, along with a preliminary list of individuals flagged for further inquiry. There were names she expected: Cord, Dorn, a few mid-level federal officials with long shadows. But there was another, one that made her jaw tighten. "Senator Avery Holt," Karoline muttered. "I thought he kept his hands clean." Sarah shook her head. "He didn't. His staff funneled payments through a nonprofit in Atlanta Civic Unity Alliance. The money bounced through 4 shell companies before it landed in a lobbying group connected to Cord's network." Karoline closed the folder slowly. "They weren't trying to win elections," she said. "They were trying to rig the judiciary for the next 20 years. Sarah didn't reply. Across town, Senator Holt sat behind his desk with the same folder, the same name circled in red. Karoline Leavitt. He ran his fingers over the ink like it might smudge away if he rubbed hard enough. "She's out of control," he said, more to himself than anyone else. His chief of staff, a man named Renner, leaned against the bookshelf. "Whitaker warned you this would happen," Renner replied, his voice low, rehearsed. "He said the slap would trigger more than headlines." Holt turned sharply. "I didn't think she'd survive the smear campaigns." "She didn't survive," Renner said with a smirk. "She transformed." Back at the White House, Karoline's transformation was evident in every corner of her office. The silence, the stillness. It wasn't retreat. It was control. She didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. The city was listening. Every network, every agency, every name she'd once whispered in private was now being spoken aloud by journalists and investigators. But not everyone had gone quiet. That afternoon, a video surfaced online. Grainy, shaky, recorded on a phone from the back of a Capitol elevator. It showed Cord and Dorn together, faces pale, voices low. "She has everything," Cord said. "Ruiz, the files, the paper trail. We should have taken her seriously after the slap." "You think it's too late?" Dorn asked. Cord hesitated. "I think it's already over." The video exploded. Major outlets had it replayed within the hour. Legal analysts dissected the tone, the admissions, the implication that Dorn and Cord had been working in tandem to suppress evidence. Social media reacted like wildfire. They knew, over for Cord, Dorn resign. Karoline watched the footage from her desk, her face blank. "They're unraveling in real time," Sarah said. "Cord's lawyer just canceled his TV appearance. Dorn's office isn't returning calls." Karoline stood, brushing her blazer straight. "They thought silence was power," she said. "Turns out, silence is just what you hear before the dam breaks." Her phone buzzed. A message from Noah. "New tip. Unconfirmed, but strong. A former federal contractor is claiming Pendleton oversaw case decisions that shielded campaign finance fraud for 4 election cycles. This goes back further than we thought." Karoline replied instantly. "Get a name. We move tonight." She turned to Sarah. "Call DOJ. We need to accelerate. No more slow leaks. We go to the press with a formal timeline. Every judge, every PAC, every name." Sarah nodded, but her brow furrowed. "They'll retaliate, Karoline. This is full exposure. You won't just be in danger, you'll be the target." Karoline didn't flinch. "I already am." That night, the White House press room overflowed. Reporters lined every wall, their faces pale in the camera lights. The podium stood under a single spotlight, and when Karoline walked out, clean lines, navy suit, no makeup, only truth. There was no applause, no noise, just breathless silence. She looked straight into the camera. "This is not about party. It's not about preference. It's about power. About how some used money, fear, and silence to bend justice in their favor until someone told them no." She paused. Not for effect, but for gravity. "I was slapped in a courtroom because I asked whether justice could still be fair. What we've uncovered since makes that question irrelevant. Justice hasn't just been bent, it's been sold." The room stayed silent. But in homes across the country, people were standing. "Tomorrow," she said, "we release the full report. Timeline, evidence, testimony. And we ask the Department of Justice to move forward with federal indictments. This isn't about revenge, this is about repair." And with that, she stepped down, left the podium, and disappeared behind the curtain. Outside, the rain finally stopped. But inside Washington? The flood was just beginning. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., like it hadn't been watching. A clean golden light swept across the Capitol dome and over the White House lawn, catching on raindrops that clung stubbornly to the grass. But the city it revealed wasn't clean. Not anymore. Not after last night. Not after Karoline Leavitt stepped behind that podium and said what no one else had the nerve to say. That justice had been sold. That power had been traded in back rooms and bartered through silence. That the system wasn't broken, it had been bought. Now the buyers were scrambling. By 7 a.m., inboxes across the Capitol were detonating. The Justice Department's official press line was jammed. The Senate Ethics Committee held an emergency meeting behind closed doors. And the leaked Ruiz documents, packaged and authenticated by the Sentinel, Karoline's team, and DOJ officials, had been downloaded over 4 million times in under 12 hours. Inside the White House, Karoline stood in front of the window, untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. "They're starting to cannibalize each other," Sarah said behind her, eyes on the stream of headlines pouring across her tablet. "Cord's people just confirmed he's cooperating with investigators. That means he flipped." Karoline didn't look away from the glass. "He didn't flip," she said quietly. "He's sinking." There's a difference. Sarah tapped the screen again. Holt issued a denial at 6 a.m., called the accusations a media trap laid by a political operative, said you're weaponizing the Justice Department. Karoline smiled, but there was no amusement in it. I'm not weaponizing it, she said. I'm reminding them it still has teeth. Behind her, the phones rang endlessly. Reporters, lawmakers, foreign correspondents, even heads of state from allied countries were requesting briefings, worried that the destabilization of one of America's pillars might have ripple effects far beyond its borders. But Karoline didn't move. She was waiting. And at 8:02 a.m., it came. Sarah's phone buzzed. She read the message, her face going still. It's confirmed, she said. The Attorney General is issuing indictments. Cord, Pendleton, Holt, and 3 senior staffers tied to Dorn's PAC. They're making the announcement in 2 hours. Karoline turned from the window. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a breath that reached the bottom of her lungs. Then she asked the question that mattered most. What about Dorn? Sarah hesitated. No confirmation yet. He's still in his office. No movement, no statement. Karoline nodded, jaw tight. He's the centerpiece, she said. The others were arms. He was the brain. Across town, in a penthouse that felt more like a fortress, Senator Randall Dorn sat in a leather chair, his phone face down, television muted. The news was playing anyway, his name in bold, his face splashed across every screen. His wife hadn't come home. His aides had gone quiet. And the silence, the same silence he had once used to crush careers, was now pressing on his chest like a weight. His chief of staff stood in the doorway, hands behind his back. They'll be here soon. Dorn didn't respond. Cord's lawyer confirmed everything, the man added. Said you instructed the judge personally. The memo was traced back to your office printer. Dorn let out a slow breath. She was never supposed to last this long, he said, almost to himself. She didn't last, the aide replied. She won. Back at the White House, Karoline sat at her desk while cameras were set up in the press room once again. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just the end of the beginning. A knock at the door. It was Noah Blake, the journalist who'd helped crack the network open. He stepped in, soaked from the rain, a fresh folder tucked under his arm. This just landed, he said. Anonymous source. Same encryption tag as the Ruiz drop. Karoline opened the folder slowly. Inside were travel logs, meeting schedules, wire transfers, all tying Randall Dorn to a private firm in Belgium that specialized in data suppression and covert foreign political strategy. Sarah's voice caught. He wasn't just influencing judges. Karoline looked up. He was working with foreign entities to shape legal outcomes on U.S. soil. She stood, walked to the whiteboard behind her desk, and circled Dorn's name, leaving a dent in the marker tip. This goes global, she said. Prepare everything for escalation. DOJ, Homeland, State. Noah watched her, something close to awe in his eyes. You realize you've just uncovered the biggest political conspiracy since Watergate, right? Karoline didn't blink. And I'm just getting started. 2 hours later, the Attorney General stepped to a podium of his own. The indictments were read aloud, like a litany of betrayal. Judge Edward Pendleton. Obstruction, abuse of power, conspiracy to commit fraud. Brennan Cord. Bribery, laundering, perjury. Senator Avery Holt. Ethics violations, misuse of campaign funds. 3 PAC operatives. Felony corruption, election interference. The last name? Senator Randall Dorn, under review. Investigation pending. Status, sealed until additional evidence is processed. It was a signal, a warning shot to the man who had once thought himself invincible. To Karoline Leavitt, it was permission. She stood before the press later that evening to deliver one final truth. When I was struck in that courtroom, it was meant to silence me. But sometimes, a slap is just a spark. And if you try to burn down the truth, you better be ready for what rises from the ashes. Outside, the floodlights lit up the White House like a fortress. But Karoline Leavitt wasn't hiding inside it. She was preparing her next move. They came for her that night. Not with handcuffs or subpoenas, those would have been cleaner. Predictable. But Karoline had learned by now that power, when cornered, never acts with dignity. It strikes from the shadows, slips poison into the bloodstream of public perception, and waits for the target to fall before it even fires a bullet. It started with a leak. An anonymous source handed a confidential memo to a tabloid site with a reputation for laundering political attacks. The headline dropped at 9:47 p.m., just as Karoline was reviewing the foreign finance logs tying Dorn to the Belgian shell firm. Exclusive: Karoline Leavitt's secret emails reveal collusion with conservative donors to smear judges. It was fiction. Not just exaggerated, fabricated. The emails were forged, the narrative twisted to imply that Karoline had orchestrated the investigation for partisan gain. Within minutes, bots began swarming social media. Threads, hashtags, memes. The hashtag #LeavittLeaks hit trending within the hour. The timing was no accident. Sarah burst into Karoline's office with 2 tablets and a face gone pale. It's coordinated, a full digital assault. Same tactics we saw during the 2020 disinformation campaigns. Paid networks, overseas traffic, bot patterns. This isn't grassroots, it's engineered. Karoline didn't look away from her screen. Dorn knows he's next. This is his smokescreen. Sarah hesitated. Do you want to respond? Karoline shook her head. Not yet. If we swat at smoke, we miss the fire. Let them scream. She closed the file, stood, and walked to the board. Dorn's name was circled in red. She drew a second circle next to it and wrote a new one beneath. Belgian Gate. Trace the company, she said to Sarah. I want to know who sits on that board, who moves its money, and where their files are stored. If Dorn has foreign help, we need to prove it before the smear campaign sticks. Sarah nodded, already dialing. Outside, Washington buzzed with rumors. On the Capitol floor, allies of Dorn began echoing the fabricated claims, slipping the language into interviews and pressers. They didn't mention the slap anymore. They didn't dare. That moment had backfired. But they whispered about overreach, about political vendettas, about weaponized justice. The irony didn't even sting. Because they weren't speaking to the truth, they were speaking to the fear. The fear that Karoline might actually finish what she'd started. By midnight, the White House legal team was in her office. Senior counsel, chief advisors, a communications strategist who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. They laid out the options. Deny the leak, release official records, prepare for a congressional inquiry into her actions. All procedural, all cautious. Karoline listened, nodded, then quietly cut them off. We're not going to play defense, she said. We're going to expose the people who paid to attack the system, and now think they can flip the narrative just because they've been caught. The strategist cleared his throat. With respect, Ms. Leavitt, if we escalate too hard, you become the story. Karoline stood, walked slowly around the desk. I've been the story since he hit me, she said. The difference now is that I'm writing the ending. She turned to Sarah. Tell Noah to publish the second file. Sarah's eyebrows lifted. The offshore accounts? Karoline nodded. All of it. At 1:15 a.m., the Sentinel dropped its next bombshell. Leavitt investigation uncovers foreign-linked funding to U.S. judicial PACs. Belgian entity tied to Senator Randall Dorn and disgraced Judge Edward Pendleton. Within moments, the smear campaign cracked under its own weight. The forged emails were debunked by metadata experts within the hour. Screenshots showed they'd been created the day before. Public support began to shift again. But this time, it didn't just rally to Karoline. It rallied to the idea that someone, anyone, was finally pushing back against a machine that had never been meant to be challenged. At 2:04 a.m., a single tweet from Dana Ruiz went viral. "I was silenced once. Karoline didn't let them do it again. Believe the receipts. They're terrified of her for a reason." Karoline stood by the window again, the same spot she always returned to when the flood rose. "Tomorrow they'll regroup," Sarah said beside her. "Try something new." Karoline nodded. "Then we push harder. Dorn's still protected. His resignation would be symbolic, but we're not chasing symbols." She turned back toward her desk, her voice low. "We're chasing every name, every dollar, every ruling, until there's nowhere left for them to hide." In the corner of her office, a red light blinked on a secure line. A call from DOJ. The voice on the other end was firm, tired, resolute. "We're ready to move. Prepare your team. We're unsealing Dorn's file in the morning." Karoline's eyes locked on the whiteboard, her gaze fixed on the final circle. She didn't smile. She sharpened her focus. Because once the lie breaks, there is no going back. Dawn crept into Washington like a secret too heavy to carry. No trumpets, no grand announcement, just light bleeding over buildings that had, for years, protected the very corruption now unraveling at their feet. Somewhere deep within the Department of Justice, a clerk walked into a room, unlocked a drawer, and pulled a single manila folder stamped with 2 words. Dorn, unsealed. By 6:12 a.m., federal agents had it in hand. Not a rumor. Not a leak. Not a whisper passed between journalists and aides. This was official. And it was happening. Karoline stood in front of her mirror, slipping her hair into a tight bun, adjusting the navy blazer that had become something of a uniform. She didn't dress for television anymore. She dressed for war. She didn't look tired. She looked decided. Sarah entered, holding her tablet like it was burning. "They've unsealed it. DOJ confirmed. Dorn's being served a warrant today. Charges are pending: foreign collusion, judicial tampering, election interference, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." Karoline didn't blink. "What time?" 10. She checked her watch. "Good. That gives us 4 hours to own the narrative before they try to twist it again." Outside the White House, the press was already gathering. The networks had picked up the buzz before sunrise. Something big was coming. The satellite vans were lined up. Microphones were prepped. And inside every newsroom from Manhattan to Los Angeles, editors sharpened headlines with one word in mind: Dorn. Back across town, Senator Randall Dorn sat in his private study, blinds drawn, bourbon untouched. The world around him was collapsing, like a carefully balanced house of cards, suddenly kicked from underneath. The once loyal staffers were gone. His phones rang without end, not out of loyalty but curiosity. Would he run? Would he resign? Or would he burn everything on his way out? He chose silence. At 8 a.m., Karoline stepped into the West Wing briefing room. Not for a press conference. Not yet. But to prepare. She stood behind the podium, looked out over the rows of empty seats, and pictured them filled with cameras and flashbulbs and voices raised not in curiosity, but in panic. Because the truth, once it reaches momentum, doesn't wait for permission. It moves like a wave. And this wave had only just begun to crest. Sarah approached, holding another file. New deposition. Cord has signed a sworn affidavit confirming Dorn's direct involvement in the PAC's fund transfers. He claims Dorn called Pendleton by name in closed meetings, said he could guarantee favorable rulings through him. Karoline took the file, read it once, and set it down. That's enough to break him in court. It's more than that, Sarah said. It's enough to take down everyone who covered for him. Karoline looked up. Then we go all the way. At 9:45 a.m., DOJ vans pulled into Capitol Hill. By 10:02, Dorn was being escorted out of his office, coat unbuttoned, tie askew, his face pale but stoic. The cameras swarmed, but he didn't speak, didn't wave. The once lion of the Senate was now just another man whose power was borrowed and overdue. The footage aired in real time. No delay, no filter. A symbol of power turned into a cautionary tale. Karoline watched from her office in silence. Sarah said nothing. Neither of them celebrated. This wasn't a win. This was the cost. At 11 o'clock a.m., Karoline stood before the press for what was now being called the most significant government corruption exposure in over a generation. She adjusted the microphone, waited for silence, then spoke. Senator Randall Dorn has been taken into federal custody. This is not a political moment. It is a moral one. He did not fall because of partisanship. He fell because he believed he could buy justice. Flashbulbs lit up the room. She continued, "For weeks, you've asked me if this is personal. Let me answer that. Yes. It became personal the moment I was struck in a courtroom for asking a question. It became personal when we learned that judges were being bought, rulings were being sold, and power was protecting itself under the guise of tradition." She placed a printed sheet on the podium, the official DOJ summary of the Dorn indictment. This isn't just about who fell today. It's about who stood. Dana Ruiz, Noah Blake, Sarah Mendoza, every whistleblower, every journalist, every citizen who refused to look away. They carried the flame when the system tried to go dark. And then she said the words that would be replayed in classrooms and headlines for years. This is what happens when we stop asking for justice and start demanding it. Outside, the Capitol's flag fluttered under a clear blue sky. Dorn was gone. Pendleton was disgraced. Cord was singing like a broken clock tower. But Karoline knew better than to call this peace. This wasn't the end of corruption. It was just the end of their illusion that no one would ever dare challenge it. The city didn't breathe for the rest of the day. Dorn's arrest sent a shockwave through Washington's marble veins. Hallways in the Capitol filled with hurried footsteps and sidelong glances. Phones rang without pause in law firms, lobbying offices, newsrooms. Staffers deleted old emails. PR firms drafted last-minute statements for people praying they wouldn't be named next. And in a dozen quiet offices across D.C., powerful men and women met in whispers, not to express shock, but to strategize. Because they knew this wasn't the climax. It was only the threshold. Karoline sat at her desk, phone buzzing non-stop, but she ignored the calls. She was watching a live stream, an anchor pointing at a wall-sized diagram titled The Dorn Web, with names and dollar signs threaded between photos of PACs, judges, and corporations. She wasn't watching for ego. She was watching for reaction. She wanted to see who stepped forward, who fell silent, who tried to rewrite history before the ink dried. Sarah entered with a laptop tucked under her arm and a grim look on her face. "We found something," she said, setting the computer down in front of Karoline. "Noah's team cracked the metadata on the Belgian files. There's a buried folder that didn't show up in the initial analysis. Password protected. Double encrypted. But we got in." Karoline leaned in, scanning the first few documents. They weren't just financial records. They were communications. dozens of emails between Dorn and an unnamed offshore handler, codenamed Sender 82, discussing which cases needed to be buried, which PACs needed additional funding, which reporters should be discredited quietly, and which whistleblowers should be handled preemptively. "Who the hell is Sender 82? Karoline asked, eyes narrowing. "We don't know yet," Sarah replied. "But whoever they are, they weren't just watching this happen. They were pulling strings, suggesting judges, dictating messaging, funding counter-narratives." Karoline leaned back slowly, exhaling. "Then Dorn wasn't the architect. He was the front." "And this," Sarah said, pointing at the screen, "this is bigger than a domestic corruption case. This is foreign influence running through the U.S. legal system." Karoline stood, her mind already racing. "Get the files to DOJ and send them to NOAA. Quietly. I want this broken before they realize what we've found." Across the river, in a high-rise overlooking Arlington, a man sat alone at a steel desk. The window behind him was tinted dark enough to hide his face, but his screen glowed with the same emails now sitting on Karoline's desk. Sender 82. He didn't panic. He didn't call anyone. He simply shut his laptop and walked across the room to a black safe hidden behind a framed photo of a European summit. From inside, he removed a small phone. Burn code. No contacts. No GPS. He dialed a number from memory. It rang once. "They found the archive," he said. On the other end, silence. Then it's time. Back at the White House, Sarah's phone lit up with a new alert, something flagged by one of their internal watch lists. A social media surge. A coordinated hashtag campaign, already trending within minutes. Leavitt Gate, fabricated files, foreign plant. The White House. Karoline's jaw tensed. "They're trying to flip the script again." Sarah nodded, scanning the data. "It's the same troll farms, same fingerprints. They're trying to frame you as a collaborator, that you fabricated the Dorn connection to a foreign entity to boost your own political career." Karoline didn't speak for a moment. Then she reached for her phone and texted Noah. The backlash started. "Release everything. No redactions. The people deserve to see it raw." He replied within 30 seconds. "Uploading now. Going live at midnight." The play was dangerous, but it was necessary, because once they painted her as the villain, the truth would mean nothing unless it was louder than the lie. At 11:59 p.m., the Sentinel released the full Sender 82 archive. Emails, wire transfers, messaging playbooks, even classified-looking memos that referenced intelligence contractors, not just journalists or lobbyists. Within an hour, screenshots flooded the internet. One message, dated 6 weeks before Pendleton slapped her in court, read, "Target, KL identified. Media volatility high. Leverage judicial response to initiate distraction cycle." Sarah read it aloud, then whispered, "They planned it." Karoline didn't move. "They wanted me humiliated on camera, so I'd be too wounded to push back. They didn't count on it becoming a catalyst." As dawn cracked over the city once again, the narrative had shifted once more. Not a scandal, not a political story, but something far more dangerous. An infiltration. A campaign of quiet foreign influence weaved into the bones of America's justice system and exposed because one woman refused to stay quiet after a slap. And now, even the people behind the curtain were blinking in the light. By morning, there were no more whispers, only alarms. The unsealed Sender 82 archive detonated across Washington like a bomb laced with names, dates, account numbers, and motives. It was no longer a conspiracy theory. It was no longer just about a slap. It was a map, documented proof that America's justice system had been quietly compromised by foreign operators, not with tanks or weapons, but with money, influence, and silence. The headlines didn't know how to keep up. Even the most practiced anchors stumbled over the sheer scale of it. Overnight, networks pivoted from cautious commentary to stunned analysis. U.S. judiciary infiltrated by foreign entity, Leavitt Archive unveils decade-long operation. Codename Sender 82, DOJ launches emergency security review. Karoline Leavitt declares, "This is what they didn't want you to see." Inside the White House, Karoline sat surrounded by printed sheets from the archive. The floor of her office was covered in notes, timelines, dots connected by red ink, post-its tagged with question marks and arrows. It looked like a crime scene because it was. A long, slow, carefully orchestrated crime against the system itself. Sarah paced behind her, tablet in hand. DOJ's mobilized a task force. They've requested cooperation from Homeland Security and the NSA. They're treating Sender 82 as a foreign intelligence operation. Karoline looked up. They should. She turned her eyes to one document in particular, a transcript of a call between a U.S. federal consultant and a foreign intermediary. The consultant had been paid 6 figures to arrange a closed-door conversation between a federal judge and a donor. The transcript ended with one chilling sentence. "The press secretary won't be a problem. She'll be discredited or gone by fall." Karoline ran her finger over that sentence, not with emotion, but with resolve. Gone by fall. That was the plan. And for a while, it almost worked. They'd tried everything. Character assassination, threats, leaks, a slap in open court. And when none of it worked, they fabricated a scandal. And when that didn't work, they went silent again. But now, they were exposed. Fully. Fatally. She stood, brushing off the back of her blazer, and turned to Sarah. "Prep the press team. I'm speaking at noon." Sarah blinked. "What are you going to say?" Karoline's voice was steel. "Everything they didn't want me to." By 11:45 a.m., the briefing room was packed beyond capacity. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, cameras stacked like armor across the back wall. Even the international press had shown up. London, Tokyo, Berlin. The world had tuned in, not because of the scandal, but because of what the scandal meant. If it could happen here, it could happen anywhere. Karoline stepped up to the podium at exactly noon. No teleprompter, no speech, just a folder in her hand and a fire behind her eyes. "I didn't ask for this fight," she began, "but I answered it." The room was silent. When I walked into that courtroom and was struck by a judge, I thought I was witnessing the collapse of dignity. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that it wasn't just about one judge. It wasn't just about one case, or one political rivalry, or one slap. She held up the folder and opened it to the first page. This was about infiltration. This was about decades of quiet sabotage. It was about turning our institutions into tools so that rulings could be bought, narratives could be shaped, and justice could be rigged behind smiles and seals. Flashbulbs exploded across the room. No one spoke. They didn't dare. She kept going. Sender 82 was real. Their mission was real. And for years they were successful. They used PACs. They used judges. They used political influencers. And they hid behind our own blind spots because we assumed corruption only comes in loud forms. She closed the folder slowly. They didn't expect someone like me to notice. They didn't expect a moment of weakness, a slap, to expose a network. But it did. And now? They're running. A hand shot up from a reporter. "Do you believe there are more? Beyond the people already named?" Karoline looked straight at him. "There are always more. power doesn't operate alone. It operates in chains, and every time you cut one link, you hear another rattle. Later that evening, back in her office, Karoline received a secure envelope from the DOJ. Inside, a list of names. Judges, consultants, tech liaisons, former diplomats, all flagged by the task force based on Sender 82 communications. One of the names stood out immediately: Elliot Carr, a former national security advisor, now a private intelligence consultant, and once, 2 decades ago, a mentor to Randall Dorn. Karoline tapped the name once, then looked up at Sarah. "We just found the architect." Sarah leaned forward. "What do we do?" Karoline stood, fire back in her voice. "We finish this." The name Elliot Carr landed like a gunshot in a quiet room. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. Karoline stared at the file in silence, her thumb brushing the edge of the paper. Carr's resume read like the blueprint of American power. West Point graduate, Rhodes Scholar, former national security advisor under 2 administrations, decorated strategist, global consultant, and now, apparently, the quiet engineer of the most sophisticated infiltration of the U.S. judicial system in modern history. Sarah stood across from her, lips pressed in a thin line. He was never even mentioned in any of the original investigations. "Exactly," Karoline said, still staring at the file. "He stayed above the noise. That's how you know he was the one making it." Elliot Carr didn't appear in the spotlight. He built the stage. He didn't need credit. He needed control. And in the shadows of Dorn and Pendleton and Cord, he had quietly become the hand that turned the gears. The documents provided by the DOJ were clear. Encrypted correspondence between Carr and Sender 82, later confirmed to be his code name. Plans to suppress rulings. Lists of judges tagged with ratings. Compliant, persuadable, unstable. Briefing notes on public figure KL, Karoline Leavitt, dating back to her first year as a press aide. He had been watching her long before she even knew who he was. "They flagged you before you were anyone," Sarah said, almost in disbelief. He wrote in one message, "KL shows a concerning trajectory, high public trust potential. Monitor her closely." This was before the slap, before the press briefings, before everything. Karoline's voice dropped. "So they saw me coming, and still couldn't stop me." The implication wasn't lost on either of them. Elliot Carr hadn't built a political movement. He'd built a firewall, a hidden structure designed to protect corrupt influence from scrutiny. His weapon wasn't ideology. It was infrastructure. He made sure no one could get close to the truth because he decided where the truth was buried. And for years, it had worked. Until Karoline. Sarah sat down across from her. "We go public with this. Carr won't be like Dorn. He won't panic. He'll retaliate." Karoline nodded. "He'll use proxies, denials, try to paint himself as a victim of political revenge, but it won't matter." She picked up her phone and dialed Noah Blake. "Tell your team to prep for the Carr drop. Full exposé, timeline, correspondence. I want the American people to see who's been scripting their justice system from behind the curtain." Noah didn't hesitate. "We'll be ready." Karoline hung up, then turned back to Sarah. "And tell DOJ we want a federal hearing. Live, under oath. If we're going to bring down the architect, we're going to do it in the daylight." Elsewhere in D.C., Elliot Carr stood before a fireplace in his Georgetown home, the flickering flames dancing across the framed medals on the mantel. He sipped his scotch slowly, eyes calm, but hands tighter than they needed to be. The news hadn't broken yet, but he knew the storm was coming. A younger aide entered the room, tablet in hand. "We've been informed that DOJ is preparing a preliminary motion for a formal inquiry." There's talk of a subpoena. Carr turned. Let them talk. And Leavitt? She's going public with your name. Carr didn't flinch. Of course she is. That's what I trained them to do. Believe the system works if you shout loud enough. The aide hesitated. Sir, do you want us to begin contingency measures? Carr turned back to the fire. No, we wait. Let her play her final card. Then, we remind her who owns the table. But he was wrong. Karoline wasn't playing a final card. She was building a new deck. One that couldn't be stacked, silenced, or sold. And this time, the table wasn't his to own. The Carr story broke just before dawn. No lead-up, no teaser, no slow drip of scandal. Just a hard drop, a 40-page exposé published by the Sentinel, with every damning detail laid bare. Emails, financial records, strategic memos, and internal documents tracing a decade-long operation. And at the center of it all was one name, written with surgical finality across every headline. Elliot Carr, the man who had never run for office, never appeared in political ads, never even stood behind a podium. But for years, he'd been the ghost in the machine, deciding which judges rose, which cases disappeared, which truths were buried so deep they'd never see light. Until now. Karoline stood in front of the Situation Room's internal monitor, watching cable networks scramble to keep up. Every analyst stumbled through the same stunned phrases. Unprecedented, national security implications, coordinated subversion. Some anchors tried to soften the language. Others didn't bother. Sarah entered with a folder in hand, her face set, voice low. DOJ just responded. They're opening a full federal investigation into Carr. Subpoenas are being drafted now. He's officially under review as a potential national security threat. Karoline didn't blink. They won't find a single document with his name on it. He built this to survive exposure. Sarah nodded. Except for the part where he underestimated you. Karoline turned from the screen. He didn't underestimate me. He saw me coming. He just thought the system would stop me first. They both knew it nearly had. She returned to her desk, where another list sat waiting. This one didn't contain judges or donors or shell companies. It was a list of victims. People whose cases had been altered, buried, or destroyed by the hidden network Carr built. Names like Dana Ruiz, like military whistleblowers, journalists, even civilian plaintiffs who'd filed cases against corrupt corporations and mysteriously lost in courtrooms across the country. This is who we're fighting for now, Karoline said. Not just the people who knew, the ones who never got the chance to find out. Sarah hesitated. Do we release the list? Not yet, Karoline said. We do this one step at a time. Carr has resources. He'll unleash everything. Media allies, false claims, political distractions. She looked toward the window. The city was still waking up, unaware that everything had shifted again. But he doesn't have the one thing we have, Karoline said. Sarah looked up. What's that? The truth, and the will to say it out loud. Across the Potomac, Elliot Carr sat at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by men in suits who looked like they hadn't slept. The air was thick with panic masquerading as strategy. They have the comm logs, Elliot, one of them said, and they're authentic. We verified 3 of them. Leavitt's team cross-referenced timestamps with DOJ server pings. There's no denying it anymore. Carr poured his coffee, slow and precise. Denial isn't the goal. Then what is? Another asked. Distraction, division, delay. We don't need to convince the country I'm innocent. We only need to make them doubt she's clean. The room fell silent. But she's not running for anything, a younger strategist said. Carr gave a thin smile. Everyone in this town is running for something, even if it's just their life. Back at the White House, Karoline was preparing for what came next. A national address. Not from the president, but from her. DOJ had cleared it. Public confidence demanded it. The networks had already carved out time. The cameras would be on. The country would be watching. Sarah stood by the doorway, holding up a flash drive. "This has the final draft of your statement. Last chance to edit." Karoline took it, turned it over in her hand, then looked up. "No edits," she said. "We don't fix the truth to make it more comfortable." And then, with every light in the press room glowing hot, Karoline Leavitt stepped up to the podium, not as a press secretary, not even as a witness to history, but as a woman who had forced the truth into the open and refused to let it be buried again. The cameras blinked to life one by one, red lights glowing like the eyes of history watching. Every major network had broken into regular programming. The world wasn't just listening anymore, it was holding its breath. She looked down once at the flash drive in her hand, then tucked it away. She didn't need it. Not tonight. "When I first walked into this building," she began, voice clear and even, "I believed that the greatest threat to America was disunity, that our biggest battle would be fought between left and right, red and blue." She paused, not for effect, but to let the weight of what came next land without obstruction. I was wrong. Across the country, in living rooms and offices and cafes, people leaned in. Karoline's voice carried like a whisper that dared to become thunder. "The greatest threat we face isn't disagreement. It's deception, not from enemies overseas, but from those who built their power in the shadows of our own institutions. People who wrap themselves in the language of patriotism while selling out the very laws that protect us." The room was silent. Not even the reporters dared to type. She continued, "This week, we exposed Elliot Carr, not just as a corrupt strategist, but as the architect of a multi-year infiltration of the American justice system, funded, coordinated, and executed through shell organizations, political surrogates, and judicial manipulation. A system designed to reward loyalty to money, not truth." A few murmurs rippled through the press corps. No one expected her to go this far. But Karoline didn't flinch. She looked directly into the camera now. "I was targeted before I ever held this role. Not because I was powerful, but because I wasn't. Because I was unbought. Because I asked questions. And when that failed to silence me, they tried something else." A faint red mark on her cheekbone, long faded, but not forgotten, seemed to glow beneath the lights. "I was struck in a courtroom by a federal judge. That moment wasn't about me. It was about control. A warning shot, delivered in front of cameras. A reminder of who was supposed to stay silent." She let the silence stretch again, this time letting the memory breathe, letting the country remember what it had seen. But the slap didn't silence me. It started something. Outside the building, the wind howled faintly through the streets of D.C. Inside, not a single person shifted in their chair. It started a reckoning. We followed the money. We found the files. We heard the voices of the silenced and amplified them. What began as one act of violence uncovered a network of betrayal. And I say this now, with full knowledge of its weight. Justice in this country was not just broken. It was hijacked. She paused, hands steady on the podium, her eyes never leaving the lens. And now, we take it back. No slogan, no applause line, just 6 words and a vow. I will not be intimidated. I will not be slandered into silence. I will not let the truth die in darkness because it's inconvenient to the powerful. Cameras zoomed in, Phones recorded. Hashtags ignited. We are calling for a full federal tribunal on the judicial compromise. We are demanding congressional oversight of foreign-affiliated political donations. And we are moving forward with legislation to protect whistleblowers, not just in theory, but in law. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood like a monument to the truth and the cost of speaking it. When history looks back on this moment, I don't want them to remember a slap. I want them to remember the sound of a system waking up. With that, she stepped back from the podium and walked off stage. Just resolve in her stride and silence behind her. A silence filled not with fear, but with reckoning. Because Karoline Leavitt hadn't just uncovered corruption. She had broken its rhythm, and now the system would have to learn to breathe without it. Thank you for watching. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If Karoline Leavitt's journey, the courage to speak, the resolve to fight, and the impact of truth in the face of corruption resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who may need to be reminded that one voice can challenge even the most powerful systems. And don't miss the next video popping up on your screen. It's another incredible story of integrity, defiance, and the quiet strength that changes everything.